Darlene Whitaker lifted her glass of lemonade at the edge of the patio. She looked straight at me. Then she told the whole backyard that Evan always could find a woman with bigger ambitions. It was the 4th of July, Greg and Linda's anniversary barbecue. 40 people stood around a folding table covered in potato salad and citronella candles. Darlene picked that exact moment, with her son 3 feet away holding a beer he wasn't drinking, to remind everyone what she thought of me. Nobody laughed. Nobody had to. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't the 10th time. By that summer, Darlene's comments had become weather. You didn't argue with weather. You just learned which jacket to bring. I'd been married to Evan Whitaker for 11 years. I was 37 years old. I worked part-time doing freelance logistics consulting from a desk in the spare room of our house, a suburb 20 minutes outside Chicago. I had gotten very good at letting things slide off me in front of company. Then I'd lie awake at 2 in the morning replaying every word in the dark. Most days, away from his mother, Evan made coffee every morning without being asked and remembered which weekends I needed quiet to finish a project. None of that showed up once Darlene was in the room. In the room with her, he stopped finishing his own sentences and let her finish them for him. Darlene's reaction the day Evan proposed should have told me everything, years early. He called her before he called anyone else in his family. She picked up already laughing, the kind of laugh you give before you've even heard the news, like she had her objections lined up in advance. 2 weeks later, we drove over to share the wedding date in person. She hugged me for exactly as long as good manners required, then turned to Evan and asked if it really wasn't too soon to be sure. He said no. She said, "Well, you know best," in a tone that meant the opposite. 3 months before that barbecue, Darlene had done something almost identical at Greg and Linda's actual anniversary dinner, the sit-down one, not the cookout. She pulled out her phone at the table. She showed Evan a photo of a woman named Caroline, the daughter of her book club friend Pam. Caroline had just made partner at a firm downtown. Darlene held the phone up between us, angled toward Evan, and said, "There, that's a woman at his level." She didn't say it to me. She said it about me, the camera tilted past my shoulder like I was a chair somebody needed moved. Greg laughed a little, the kind of laugh men do when they don't know where to put their eyes. Linda refilled wine glasses very quickly, the way she always did once Darlene got going. Evan looked at the photo for 2 seconds. Then he put his hand over his mother's phone and said, "Mom, come on." The voice meant nothing. Not anger. Not even embarrassment. Maintenance. The way you'd talk to a dog that jumped on the couch one more time. A few months earlier, on Thanksgiving, Darlene asked me to clear the table while the rest of the family stayed seated drinking coffee. She didn't ask Evan's sister Sabrina. She didn't ask her own husband, who was technically still alive then, and sitting at the head of the table doing nothing in particular. She looked at me, smiled the way she always smiled right before something landed, and said, "You're just so good at this kind of thing, the domestic stuff. Better leave the big talk to us." The big talk that day was about a cousin's promotion. I stood up and started stacking plates while 12 people kept discussing someone else's career. Sabrina watched me from across the table with an expression I couldn't name yet. I'd remember that look 2 years later, in a conference room downtown. There was Evan's 40th birthday too, the one with the silver frame. Darlene ordered a custom engraved frame online and had it shipped to the house 3 weeks early so she could show it off before the party even started. Inside it sat a photo of Evan at maybe 7 years old, missing a front tooth, holding a fishing rod twice his size. She handed it to him in front of 18 guests, kissed his cheek, and said, "Sometimes life brings you the wrong person, but we learn to live with it." 18 people heard that sentence land. 18 people watched Evan unwrap a line aimed straight at his own wife and say nothing back. He set the frame on the mantel, next to the one photo from our wedding day. He thanked his mother for thinking of him. He never once turned to me. There were smaller signs too, ones I filed away without really looking at them. 6 months before I found anything, Evan canceled a walkthrough on a house in Naperville 2 days before we were supposed to see it. He gave me a vague excuse about timing and never brought the house up again. Around the same time, I noticed he tensed slightly whenever his mother talked about needing help with rent on some place she didn't seem to actually live in yet. I asked him about it once. He said she exaggerates. I let it go, the way I'd let 100 smaller things go before it. That Christmas, Darlene handed out gifts youngest to oldest, except for me. She always saved mine for last every year, like an afterthought she remembered only once everyone else had opened theirs. That year it was a cookbook. 50 meals to win over any family. She watched my face while I read the title and said, "In case you ever want to try harder." Evan's gift that year, I noticed, cost more than mine and his mother's combined. Nobody mentioned that out loud. I noticed it anyway. Darlene had one habit worth describing clearly, because once you notice it, you understand everything else about her. She wore a pearl bracelet, a thin strand with a small gold clasp. Every time she was about to say something designed to cut, she touched it first. 2 fingers along the pearls. A small adjustment on her wrist. Like she was loading something. I noticed it the 3rd year of my marriage. I never stopped noticing it. Her favorite line, the one she'd been saying since the week Evan brought me home to meet her, was that I was lucky to be chosen at all. She said it different ways over the years. Sometimes as a joke. Sometimes as advice, offered with a tilt of her head like she was doing me a favor. In the later years, almost as a threat, like she was reminding me of the terms of a contract only she had ever read in full. Evan never defended me. Not once, not at a single barbecue or dinner or birthday, for as long as we were married. He'd change the subject. He'd put a hand on my back like that was supposed to count for something. He'd wait until we were in the car and say, "She doesn't mean it like that, you know how she is." I knew exactly how she was. What I hadn't figured out yet was how much he knew about it too, and how long he'd known. That came into focus on a Tuesday evening in March. I was looking for a tax document in the home office, the small room off the kitchen where Evan kept our filing cabinet. On top of the cabinet, sitting in plain sight, was an open envelope from our bank. I read it. I didn't think twice, and I didn't feel guilty. Something about the weight of that envelope told me it wasn't going to be about taxes. It was a statement for an account I didn't recognize. Not our joint account, not my personal account. A third account, opened 2 years earlier, with regular monthly transfers going out. I traced the numbers with my finger. For $100. $600. Once, $1,100. Every transfer had the same 2 words in the memo line. For the condo. Whenever I'd brought up buying our own place, a real house with both our names on the deed instead of the rental we'd lived in since our wedding, Evan had the same answer. "We can't swing it right now. Maybe next year. The market's bad." I believed him every time. Trust like that builds into your skeleton. You stop checking it for fractures. I kept reading. A few pages further into the folder sat a deposit agreement, a real estate contract, for a 1-bedroom condo in a building 18 minutes from our house. The buyer listed was Darlene Whitaker. The unit was already furnished, according to the inventory sheet stapled behind it, down to the curtains and the bath mats. The intended primary resident, according to a handwritten note clipped to the front page, was Darlene Whitaker. In the margin of the bank statement, in handwriting I recognized instantly from every birthday card and Christmas tag for over a decade, Darlene had written 4 words to herself, like a private little prayer she didn't think anyone else would ever read. "Soon it'll finally be mine." I stood in that office for what felt like an hour. It was probably 4 minutes. I didn't cry. What happened is I folded the bank statement back along its original creases, slid it into the envelope at the exact angle I'd found it, and set it back on top of the cabinet exactly where it had been. Then I went and made dinner. Pasta. Evan ate 2 plates of it and told me it was the best thing I'd made all month. I didn't say anything that night, or the next night, or the one after that. The silence wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't denial either. It was inventory. I needed to know exactly what I was looking at before I decided what to do with it. The version of me who confronted him in the kitchen that Tuesday would have had nothing but a feeling and an envelope. Feelings get talked away. Evidence doesn't. Over the following weeks, I made calls during the hours Evan thought I was working. The first call went to a former colleague named Patricia. I'd worked under her at a logistics firm 8 years earlier, before I scaled back to freelance work to, in Evan's words, keep things flexible for the family. Patricia remembered me. She was now a hiring manager at a mid-sized distribution company on the north side. They had an opening, a real one. Operations director. 6 figures. Full benefits. I sent her my resume that same week. I updated it for the first time in 6 years, sitting at the kitchen table after Evan went to bed, in the glow of the laptop screen, while he slept upstairs, completely unaware that the woman he assumed had given up on her career had simply stopped reporting on it. I opened a new bank account 2 towns over, somewhere Darlene's name would never cross paths with mine on a shared statement. I moved small amounts into it. $80 one week. $120 the next. It wasn't much at first. It became a foundation. I found a lawyer through a friend of a friend, a woman named Naomi Briggs who worked out of a modest office above a dry cleaner. She had a brass nameplate that needed polishing and a stainless steel thermos she carried into every meeting, filled with mint tea. She set the thermos down on the desk between us before she even shook my hand, like it was part of her uniform. Naomi had a way of talking I'd never encountered before. She never raised her voice, not once, across the 11 meetings we eventually had together. She let silences sit in the room for 10, 15 seconds at a time, and somehow they never felt awkward. The first time I told her about the bank statement, the condo, years of Darlene's comments, Naomi nodded slowly and said, "People show you who they are through repetition, not through speeches. Pay attention to what repeats." I thought about that sentence for weeks. Darlene had repeated her cruelty at every gathering, every holiday, every birthday, for as long as I'd known her. I'd spent all that time treating each instance like its own small accident. At our second meeting, Naomi laid out, in plain numbers, what the marriage actually looked like on paper. The house, the retirement accounts, the joint savings that had somehow never grown the way they should have. She tapped the savings line twice and said, "This number is too low for a household earning what yours earns. Something's been leaving the building. Find out what." I spent the next month reviewing 6 years of statements, late at night, one folder at a time, cross-referencing transfer dates against the account I'd found in the office. The transfers to Darlene's account had started small, 18 months before I found the envelope, and grown steadily, almost exactly tracking with how often Evan told me money was tight. I started looking at apartments on weekends when Evan thought I was visiting my sister. I found a 1-bedroom 11 minutes from my potential new job, hardwood floors, a kitchen window facing east. I put down a deposit using money from the account Evan didn't know existed. I signed the lease alone on a Thursday afternoon in April, in a leasing office that smelled like fresh paint. It was the first decision about my own housing I had made without consulting anyone in years. Darlene noticed the change before Evan did. She always noticed first. At a backyard cookout in May, she made a comment about my new haircut, something small and barbed about women reinventing themselves a little too late. I said, "Thank you, I like it too," and walked off to refill my water. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I didn't even look back. That was new, and she felt it. I watched her hand drift toward her pearl bracelet twice that afternoon and never finished the gesture, like she'd loaded the weapon and forgotten what she wanted to say with it. A week later, at a smaller dinner, she tried again, harder. She brought up Caroline once more, asked Evan if he'd seen her recent promotion online, then turned to me sweetly to ask whether I'd thought any more about getting back into something. I told her I had, actually, and left it there. No explanation. No defense. She waited for more. I let her wait. Sabrina, across the table, hid a small smile behind her napkin. Evan noticed about 2 weeks after that. He asked me one night while we were doing dishes, out of nowhere, "Is everything okay with you?" "Not with us. With you." I told him everything was fine, which was true in a way he didn't have the context to understand. I got the job offer in June. Operations director, 11% more than I'd ever earned, full health coverage, a corner desk on the 14th floor with a view of the river. I signed the contract on a Tuesday in Naomi's office, her thermos sitting between us. Afterward, I drove home and put the signed contract into a manila folder in the back of my closet, the same folder where Evan and I had once kept the paperwork for a house we never bought together. Nobody in the family knew. Not Darlene, not Sabrina, not even my own sister yet. Some victories need to be fully built before you let anyone look at the blueprints. I filed for divorce in late July. I served Evan the papers myself at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning while he was still in his robe drinking coffee. His face wasn't shock. It was closer to recognition, the look of a man finally seeing a bill arrive for a debt he'd been pretending didn't exist. He asked me why. I told him I'd answer that once his lawyer and mine were both in the room. Some conversations only matter once there are witnesses who can't be talked out of what they heard later. He moved into a rental across town within 2 weeks, faster than I expected. The house went up for sale by August. Darlene called twice during that stretch. I never returned either voicemail. Her voice in the second one sounded noticeably less certain than I'd ever heard it. The mediation was scheduled for late September in a conference room on the 9th floor of a law office downtown, the kind with a long oval table and a water pitcher nobody touches. Evan sat with his lawyer, a tall man named Phillips who kept checking his watch. Naomi sat beside me with her thermos. In the chair closest to Evan sat Darlene, in a cream-colored blazer, the pearl bracelet on her wrist exactly as always, looking at me the way she'd looked at me for years, like a woman inspecting an animal that had wandered somewhere it didn't belong. Sabrina came too. Evan had asked her for moral support, which struck me as strange, since Sabrina and I had always gotten along better than Sabrina and her own mother did. I said nothing about it at the time. Darlene opened the meeting before anyone else had the chance to. She leaned toward her son and said, loud enough for the whole table, that she'd told him years ago this marriage was never built to last. Phillips put a hand lightly on her arm, the universal signal for please stop talking. She ignored it completely, the way she'd ignored every signal anyone had ever given her. Naomi waited until Darlene finished. She always waited until people finished. Then she opened a plain manila folder, the kind you wouldn't look twice at on a desk, and slid 3 documents across the table. One in front of Evan. One in front of Phillips. One she kept facing herself. She read from it out loud in the same unhurried voice she used for everything. She read the dates of 11 separate transfers from the joint account Evan and I had shared, totaling just under $34,000. She read the destination account number, which matched exactly the account on the deposit agreement for the 1-bedroom condo 18 minutes from the house Evan and I used to share. She read the name on the deed, Evan Whitaker, and the name on the occupancy agreement clipped behind it, Darlene Whitaker. Then she set the folder down and said nothing else. The room went quiet. Phillips broke it first, flipping through his copy of the documents twice, then a third time, his jaw working like he was chewing on something that wouldn't go down. Evan picked up his copy and stared at it without reading any of it, the way you stare at something when your brain has already caught up and your hands haven't. Sabrina spoke first. She turned to her mother and asked her, "Mom, were you seriously taking their money?" "Not Evan's money. Their money." Darlene tried to answer. She started a sentence about how a mother is entitled to support from a son who can afford it. Her own lawyer cut her off this time, a hand on her forearm, telling her quietly but clearly enough for the room to hear that she needed to stop talking immediately. Nobody backed her up. Not Sabrina. Not Evan, who hadn't said a word since the documents hit the table. Not even Phillips, who sat there with the particular stillness of a man calculating how much worse this case had just gotten. Darlene reached for her bracelet, the same gesture she'd made 1,000 times before something cutting left her mouth. This time her fingers caught on the clasp instead of smoothing past it. She pulled at it, agitated, and the clasp gave way entirely. Pearls scattered across the polished table, rolling toward the center, a few dropping off the edge and clicking onto the floor one by one in the silence. Nobody moved to help her pick them up. Not her son. Not her daughter. Not her lawyer. Her wrists sat bare. The pearls kept rolling away from her in every direction. Naomi let the silence run almost 20 seconds before she spoke again, outlining in plain terms how this discovery would affect the division of assets going forward. Phillips asked for a short recess. Darlene didn't come back into the room for the rest of that session. Sabrina stayed in the hallway with her for a while. When the mediation ended for the day, Sabrina found me near the elevators and said, quietly, that she was sorry, that she'd suspected something for a long time and never said anything, and that she hoped I knew it had nothing to do with how she felt about me. The mediation concluded 3 weeks later, in a much shorter session, with terms that reflected everything Naomi had laid out on that table. The divorce was finalized in early October. A little over 2 weeks after the paperwork went through, Evan showed up at my new apartment on a Thursday evening, unannounced. He stood in the hallway outside my door looking smaller than I remembered him ever looking. He said things had gone too far. He said his mother had crossed a line he hadn't fully seen until it was laid out on a table in front of strangers. He said maybe, now that the dust was clearing, we could think about starting over. That sentence wasn't an apology. It was a man trying to find his way back to a version of control he'd grown comfortable with, one where I absorbed the damage quietly, and he decided when the subject was finally closed. I asked him one question before he could say anything else. I asked him how long he'd known about the transfers before I found that envelope. He didn't answer right away, which was its own kind of answer. When he finally said something about not wanting to upset the family, I didn't need to hear the rest. I stood in my own doorway, in my own apartment, on a lease with only my name on it, and told him that his mother had spent years deciding I wasn't good enough for him. I let that sit for a second. Then I told him the truth I'd actually arrived at, somewhere between the bank statement and the pearls on that conference table. It turned out he was the one who hadn't been good enough for me. I closed the door. Not hard. Not dramatically. Just firmly enough that the latch caught on the first try. For years, Darlene's favorite sentence had been that I was lucky to be chosen at all, like my entire worth in that family depended on someone else's decision to keep me. I used to hear that sentence and feel small. Standing in my kitchen that night, looking at the set of keys on the counter, keys to an apartment with a lease that had only ever had my name on it, I understood the sentence differently for the first time. Nobody had ever chosen me into anything that mattered. I had simply never realized, until that year, that I was allowed to choose myself out. I lost that marriage long before I signed a single piece of paper. The day the divorce became official, I didn't lose a husband. I lost a stack of documents that had already stopped meaning anything to me months earlier. They were the ones who lost something real. They lost the only person in that family who had spent over a decade quietly holding all of it together. So I'll ask you directly, because I think about this more than I expected to. When someone spends years letting a person they love be humiliated, just to keep the peace in their own family, do they still deserve a second chance once everything finally falls apart? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, hit like and subscribe, because there are more stories like this one coming.